Our guest tonight is the hard-working father and, I was going to say and son, but Evan not here at this time, a progressive archaeo historian, Stephen Strong, and a current columnist inside the magazine. Stephen Strong is a secondary school teacher with a background in archaeology and education. He was involved in the formation of a graduate diploma of Aboriginal education for the New South Wales Department of Education, writing units on traditional law and contemporary history. Evan and Stephen have spent many years learning, living and or working. Oh my gosh, Stephen, I should apologise before I even attempt this. I am quite bad at names, especially Aboriginal ones, and if I can say it wrong, I'm going to do it. But I'm going to give it a go because you never know. And so here goes. But you correct me if I say it wrong, okay? They have spent many years learning, living and or working with the Bundjalung Language Confederation.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Cool. Northern Rivers region of New South Wales, the Ramindjeri, South Australia.
Ramindjeri, going well. Yeah, keep going. That's good.
And the, oh God, Gumilaroi.
The last one that's got 3 O's in it is Darking-Yawn.
Okay. Now everyone did that. They operate under the doctrine of Wirritjin.
Wirritjin.
Wirritjin. Black fella, white fella dreaming, in remembrance of Karno W. Is there supposed to be more to the W, or is it just W?
No, it's Karno W because he's passed on, and by traditional law, Aboriginal people can't say the full name of someone who's passed on because you might call their spirit back.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that part. I knew that they didn't like being on film after, so but I hadn't heard that. That's wonderful to know. And spokesperson for the Ramindjeri. They work with, they work with a diverse informal network of independent researchers, original custodians, elders, patrons, supporters and friends, and are based very near Australia's Stonehenge, which we're going to learn all about tonight, which I promise you. Now, if you wish to get in contact with Stephen or Evan, then their website is www.forgottenorigin.com. If you go to Facebook and just do a search for Forgotten Origin, you will also find it there. And I will also post in chat both the email and those other contact shortly. Now, if you are up our way, I'm in Queensland, or Upper New South Wales. If you'd like to see Stephen and Evan in person, they're going to be presenting on the skulls, Slater, and the standing stones, genetics and the sacred stones on the 8th of November at 6:30 p.m. at Kawana Forest Meeting Place, which is 60 Woodlands Boulevard, Meridian Plains. And on the 17th of November at 7 p.m. at the Lannister Grove Community Centre in Victoria, Thornbury. Okay, and again, I'll post that all inside the chat. Now, how are you doing today, Stephen? You had a good day? I know you had another interview this morning.
Yeah, we did. We did 2 hours in America. So, yeah, no, fine. It's all good.
Oh, well, you're doing another 2 hours in America.
No, I've done that. I've done it already.
No, we're actually in America. This is the American. Yeah.
Yep, so it's 4 hours in America today.
Yeah, it's 4 hours today. So, that's so Bobby just didn't have an accent there. He is a legit. What part of the States are you from again, Bobby?
Oh, Virginia. That's the East Coast.
Lovely. Okay. Now, as I was saying before to Sheila when Stephen wasn't on, I think I saw you at a Nexus conference over 10 years ago. When was your first presentation there? Do you remember what year it might be?
Yeah, well, yeah, but it wasn't 10 years ago. I'm not that old yet, but I think it would have been about, 5 years ago. It's when we started to work with Duncan Rhodes from Nexus, who put that on. Yeah, it would have been, that'll be about the first time we started to really start to push some of the findings we had. In our early days then, and most of the stuff that was given then we don't talk about anymore. But yeah, that was the beginning of it. One of the very first ones we did.
Yes, I was just trying to date back since I've seen you, and I've seen you at a number of events since, of course. And you've also came to my home state at one point and talked about the Pleiades to the ufology group I'm a member of. So, and that was wonderful because you brought the Rosas Rocks with you, and I actually got to play with one of the healing stones. So, very happy about that. Now, let's get into the questions. So let's start with a little bit of background. So what was the impetus or the reason that you decided to take on the out of Africa theory and prove that the Aboriginal, that is the original people, are the true ancestors of Homo sapien man?
Well, it's sort of a backdoor story because to begin with, we weren't involved in writing books. I never had any intention to write any books. I was a teacher. I've been a head teacher and a principal, and that's what I was doing, and I was teaching Aboriginal studies. And because I got heavily involved in the Aboriginal studies, and particularly in a place called Moree, which has got a high Aboriginal population, I started to teach the course, got very strong relationships with the kids I was teaching, and that opened up pathways and avenues to the adults. And then what I found in Moree over the years is they started to tell me more and more. And then I realised that the Aboriginal Studies course we wrote was primarily incorrect. So what then happened was when they went to do a review of the course, it had been hijacked by history teachers and turned into something it was never meant to be. I went back there and wanted to go after the first day, but I also told them that what we're teaching there is wrong and it's got to change because this is not what the original people believe of themselves. And got into a fairly heated discussion with the person who runs it for the state and demanded I leave after one day because I said I wasn't staying for the extra 3 days, came home early, and then realised if I was going to tell the truth, it wasn't going to be through the schools. We had to go and do it ourselves. So primarily what came out of that is because I decided I couldn't do it through the Department of Education, I made a very poor financial decision because I was at the top of the pay list there where it starts to become reasonable. Resigned and thought, okay, we'll write books and see how that works out. Now, it works out well for getting the truth out. Doesn't quite pull in the same money as I got before, but that was never the point.
I bet it doesn't. So,
no, it doesn't. But that's the point because we knew that we were never going to get this through traditional mainstream means. And if we're going to talk about the truth, we had to do this properly. And I do remember at one stage what I was doing was basically going to school each day and every spare moment for 3 o'clock, I'd be writing books. And I thought, well, I can't do both. So that's how I ended up where I am now.
Yeah, and we're really glad you are exactly where you are. Me personally, and so many others. So, and I've actually I spent today talking to a few people who just attended your last lecture in Brisbane, and they were all very impressed with it all. So, and completely mind blown, of course. That must give you a lot of good feelings when you completely turn a person's idea around, especially about the Aboriginal people as well, but also about the history and how it's been taken out of context.
Yeah, it does. It's basically what we were asked to do when I was given ceremony. That was a skill that I had with my son, and that's what we were asked to do when I was given my first ceremony, to break it in and teach people that what we've been taught about all Indigenous cultures, let's not just keep it in Australia here, but all Indigenous cultures, we've got to understand when the invaders came to these countries and fought with and defeated the original owners of both America, Australia, and many other places, the first thing they had to do is to justify something that wasn't justified. And that's when their history changed. What we're trying to do is to put it back to the way it was before the lies began.
Exactly. So for what reason or reasons would various governments, institutions and people within archaeological circles and historians want to hide the truth of our origins on Earth, do you think? What do you get out of that?
Well, I can tell you directly because I've just written my third reply to letters from the Australian government threatening to put me in jail for 3 years. It's
What?
the third one I've got. One was about the standing stone site and 2 have been about the skulls. Now, it's gone to the highest levels within the country. Now, it's a very good question. Why would they want to cover that up? Well, the problem is that the standing stone sites and the skull that we have at the moment and the one that was being discovered 2 weeks ago and we know about and the one we've dug up and had a look at, all 3 of them share features that are not a hominin and not a Homo sapien and look nothing like any being on this planet. We just had one of those skulls remade up into a complete cast of 3 dimensions, and the gentleman who did it is probably the best in this country, said there's nothing like it in the world. Why would the government want to cover that up? Because within that narrative, what we're seeing there is an off-world contribution, not only to the fact they were on this country and buried alongside us, but to our genetics and possibly even to our purpose and why we should be here. And as we found out in the Standing Stone site, our main goal was to be spiritual beings. Now, the government and the people in control and those that control the way we live from day to day and from year to year and century to century would prefer that we were basically in conflict with each other, always arguing, always fighting, not really realising we really have got an amazing potential. I mean, to explain what I mean by that, I took Graham Hancock when he spent some time in Australia to see our elder. And on that day, our elder actually disappeared in front of 10 people. And all those people will still tell you to this day, including Graham, that's exactly what happened. And we spoke about it later. And Karno spoke about it too, because he's the one who did this. And what he told us is that telepathy, disappearing, all these things are innate abilities that all humans have. I don't believe the government and I don't believe the people in control want humans to embrace what is really our purpose and the talents we actually have. So they create fear, they create conflict, and they create a history, this is the point I'm getting at, that makes it seem like we naturally are aggressive, spiteful creatures that fight each other, that warfare is part of our nature. What they're trying to cover up here is to stop people thinking about the fact that if we find out, as we will, that the mitochondrial DNA and genome of this being that has no forehead whatsoever, from the eyes up, it just slopes backward and slopes behind the eyes. In fact, 95% of the brain of this being is below eye level. Think about you and I and where most of our brain is found. This is a completely different thing. Now, what it tells me, and this is why I've had 2 letters on this one and one on the Standing Stone site, is the government's already tested these skulls. They know what's there, and they don't want people to know. Because if they know about it, they'll start to think about what our role is. And at the moment, personally, I think our role is basically global vandals when we're supposed to be galactic citizens. And if we find out that this being, which is so old, has been here for a long, long time, if it has been here this long and it is off-world and it has lived here with us, where's the potential for them to do it again? And more to the point, why did they come here? All of those questions are opened up. And it basically means that we've got to rethink who we are and where we are. They don't want that. They've told us who we are and what we are, and they want us to stay in line and do that. So I think it challenges the fabric of what it is that makes us what we think we are today, as opposed to what we ought to be tomorrow.
Exactly. And that kind of leads into disclosure. And I don't know if you realise, but I've had contact experience with a couple of entities, and I find a lot of people talk to me about why haven't they made contact to everybody, but I've always seen disclosure as a one-on-one basis, and it's kind of like you're all kind of given a job, and like mine was to start the magazine and to promote people like you. That's what I was actually told.
And I agree with you. And I think when people say they want that, what they're really saying indirectly is we want Jesus to come down with a cross with his arms out. They want something in front of them. It's never going to be that easy.
No.
I don't think it ever should be. I think it's a matter of faith. I mean, absolutely believe what the elders told me about the coming and the awakening, and the fact that there will be Pleiadians, others who'll come here. But the point that was told me many times by the elders is when they come here, people then can't say, oh, yeah, I get it now, I'll become part of that team. It's too late. Your decision has to be made before there's an appearance, but people want the appearance first. The fact that you saw something personally, which is true, and set you on a path, that's what they wanted. What they don't want to do is to come out into the main shopping mall and wave to everyone and say, here we are, think about it, because that is not a matter of faith anymore. It's a matter of common sense. Oh, my God, all this rubbish about aliens and all this other stuff that the hippies were talking about, it's right. Well, we'll sign up now. It doesn't work like that. You have to sign up before anything is shown. That's part of the deal.
Completely agree. So the Gangamaya, did I pronounce that correctly?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Has challenged a lot of archaeologists, not to mention the Mungo Man site. And of course, we'll be talking about your own finding a little bit down the track here. Have you seen any repercussions in print or via the media? Not your own repercussions, but just in general, since both of those have been exposed? Have any books, what I was really trying to get at there is, have they rewritten anything, or are they just kind of playing dumb?
No, what tends to happen is there's been a lot of very inconvenient pieces of archaeology that come out in Australia. Like, I'll give an example with Mungo Man. Mungo Man is dated by 45,000 years by Jim Bowler through analysing geology that's 200 to 300 metres away. It was dated 65,000 years by Alan Thorne by analysing two different methods on the burial site. Now, the interesting part with Mungo Man is 65,000 years is sort of killing the out of Africa theory, but more importantly, it has genetics that no being has today, but it's a Homo sapien. And that's a bit of an issue because they can't find where it comes from. So what they originally said was it's a mutated form of Homo sapien and of no importance. Therefore, let's not worry about it. The date's still an issue, but now what they did was recently they re-examined Mungo Man and did the genetics again. And they said, oh, sorry, boys and girls, we all told you it was a mutation. It's not a mutation. We've now found that it's got European genes in it. Now, I want you to think about that for a sec. European genes and Europeans come into existence 40,000 years ago. This being is found in Australia, which is 45 to 65,000 years ago, and has European genes. So what they then said was, oh, it's a sample that's been tainted. Therefore, we'll ignore it again. And I'm thinking, tainted by who? Europeans that don't exist? What it tells me is, if they wanted to follow it through, that it's got European genes because the Europeans come out of Mungo Man. Exactly. This is their great-grandfather. But no, they didn't see it that way. They said, oh, it's tainted in some way. And from that point, nobody goes back to it. It happens every time. There was a finding by Jim Bowler, the one that said it was 45,000 years, where he found a midden in Point Ritchie in Victoria, way down the bottom, 80 to 90,000 years old with human activity.
Wow.
And what he said was 80 to 90,000 years. What he said was, well, the techniques we used were great. The date is 80 to 90,000 years. I don't doubt that, but I'm not going to talk about it until we get another date like that because I don't want to go any further. He's never been back to the site. What he forgot was in 1982, he wrote a paper with Gurdeep Singh and Peter Ewendike where they said they found evidence of fire stick farming on the Great Barrier Reef that meant humans were there 180,000 years ago. So theoretically, he's already done other work like that. But look what his answer was. I don't want to do it anymore until there's another paper that proves it. Man, did you forget your shopping list? Because 25 years before, because I always do, he'd already done that. But he even conveniently forgot the fact that he's already corroborated that date with earlier work. So what they do is I'll make an announcement like that and then leave it alone and don't come back to it. And the reason they don't come back to it is because these are inconvenient truths that sort of open up their history and say, well, look, we've got this wrong. We've got to look again. So it's a preconditioned part of Australian archaeology and to a lesser extent geology that when these things turn up, which they do all the time, let's forget trained into them.
Do you know, I just can't get over that mentality, I've got to say, especially in a field of science. I mean, isn't their whole philosophy, you know, to retest until you get the same? It just beggars belief, doesn't it? That this is why conspiracists, you know, come up with conspiracy theories when, you know, people don't go and do the correct investigation.
Well, that's exactly why they do it, because they look at it and think the whole nation isn't doing it. It must be a conspiracy. I can tell you this, at an academic level, it's not. It's incompetency. At a higher level, I'm talking about the people who control everything. They already know this. It's a different level. The word conspiracy might fit into that, but when they put the academics in there, most of them have tenures that are semi-permanent in positions where admitting you're wrong is tantamount to harikari. It's really like political academic suicide to say, oh, I think I've made a mistake. I actually think academics that do that are the ones I admire the most, because it means they're open. Their minds are open to new ideas. I remember.
But I don't get that at all, because if you look at the normal scientific fields, theories are created, and then, you know, 50 years happens and they disprove that theory and they create a new theory. This is the same. Archaeology should follow the same kind of pattern. Okay, we were up to 65,000 years. Well, now we're up to 180,000 years. Let's do, you know, it should be continuous learning and research and update. It just isn't that way. That's why I think the conspiracists get hold of this stuff, and they kind of think somebody's suppressing information. I don't know.
Look, there's a great example of that in America. There's a place in America called Lake Valsequillo, and Cynthia Earle, they found some archaeology there that was quite amazing, like an engraving of a three-tusked mastodon elephant that hasn't been in America for basically a million years. And they went down there and they took what was considered the best archaeological field they could take. They took geologists, people proficient in uranium series dating and different types of dating. And what they found was they were looking at human evidence, and there was a beautiful archaeological site that was sealed off by volcanic ash, and they could date it. And all of the geology and uranium series came up with dates of between 200 to 600,000 years.
Wow.
And there was about 7 different tests that were done. And they all came up in 6 figures, but they all said, but no one's been in America until 10,000 years ago. And what happened was, these people to this day, Virginia Stein McIntyre, who is now selling flowers because she was adamant she had dates of 300,000 years. What happened was that all of the geologists were dismissed, and the archaeologists, their theory held fast against the science that was given from the best science in America. And basically what happened in Lake Valsequillo to this very day, there are dates coming out of there that get into 1 million years that have come out of Japan for this site. But in America, it was banned. No one went there for about 25, 30 years after, until a guy that was doing a business degree funded a 3-week trial where they found more evidence of a date that went way into 6 figures again, published it again, and no one looked at it. So it's not something that's just endemic to Australia. It goes around the world. And the reason is that the archaeologists, I'm going to be very frank about this, and I do a lot of archaeologists, are primarily people very clever with a spade and can do a drip line in a cave, and that's really about the sum total of it. When they want to go further, they bring in a geologist and say, look, I found this in this level of dirt there. Can you tell me what it is, what type of rock it is, and how old it is? And they'll do all that, and they'll give that back. But in Lake Valsequillo, they brought them in and they gave them the dates, and they just didn't want to hear it, so they dismissed it. And to this day in America, Lake Valsequillo is a place that's basically for archaeologists who want to keep a job. It is a complete no-go zone, because every time you go there, you get 6 figures. And we get that in Australia too. So whenever that appears, what they do is they may listen to it, and then they'll write up a disclaiming paper. And I've seen them do it in Australia. Quite recently, we had a place called Jaminiman in Australia, where we had dates of 119 and 179,000 years. And what they basically said was the science was perfect, but the grains that you measured received insufficient sunlight before they were buried. And I wondered to myself, how would you know where that rock was 179,000 years ago to know where the damn thing was, whether it was out in the shade or in the sun? They use things like that, and then 10 archaeologists will sign up alongside it and they'll say, oh, it's been discredited. It was never discredited. Their discredit was rubbish and it could never be proven, but everyone accepted it straight away. So there is a sort of an inbuilt resistance to any date that tries to change what they've made up, which is a story about some people coming out of Africa 60,000 years ago and then populating the rest of the world. Look, with Africa, let's just think about one thing there. The genome patterns of Africans, they have 6. For Australian original people, they have so far 34 they've measured, and we've got 3 they don't even haven't measured yet, which brings it up to 37. Now, explain to me how it can be that the Africans can be older when they've got 6 genome patterns and the original people have close to 40. They can't be older. That's just common sense.
Yes,
but believe it or not, that is pure science that nobody will challenge. Now, the Russians quite recently did some study. It was called the walkthrough test. It was the largest study of men's semen, Y chromosomes, to find out the links between Africans. And what they did was they took 400 samples of non-Africans from all over the world, not just original people, but all other races, but not Africans, and then compared it to 13 distinct African markers to find out how much of a correlation there was. Do you know how many times there was a correlation between those 400 people and the 13 distinct markers? None. They got a score of none.
None, aren't you?
None out of 5,200.
Wow.
But you'll find if you go to all the universities, everyone will tell you, oh, that we all came from the Africans. Well, if Eve did, I don't know where Adam came from, because his Y chromosomes did not come from Africa. That's the one thing the Russian group proved. So really, the evidence is all around the place. So what they do, as I said, is they when this sort of evidence comes out, you'll never read about it mainstream, and they block it as much as they can. It sneaks out for a couple of days, then disappears. It's a very clever fact, but that's the way they work.
Well, hopefully there's, you know, the same way that social media has kind of reinvigorated the news systems. I'm hoping that social media and stations like Revolution Radio that we're on now will also help to get your message out further than the mainstream could anyway. You know, as you were talking there, it actually made me think about the 6. I think there's 6 root races. There's a theory or a myth about we've kind of doomed ourselves 6 times previously, and the years that you were talking about would give credence to that theory. So you've obviously heard of the root races, yes?
Yeah. The fact that there were earlier races and they wiped themselves out in different ways. Look, if you go through history, you're going to go back 10 to 12,000 years, and you can ask the archaeologists, and they'll reluctantly agree to this. Our population dropped by 95%. What happened? What happened? They say, oh, before that there was nothing. We were all walking around in caves and grunting. That's not true at all. Something happened at that stage where everything got wiped out, and then we started up again. And that's the one. We've picked it up from there. We say basically that civilization and knowledge and intelligence and all the things that make Homo sapiens sapien. I wonder why they repeat the word twice, because it's a lie. Why they came about then, basically, and all the things that make us special came about in the last 8 to 10,000 years. No, there were earlier civilizations, quite a few of them. We've seen them in Australia. We've seen massive evidence of earlier civilizations that were very sophisticated using science we don't have today. Absolutely.
Well, isn't the fact that we have 6 distinct races on the planet proof enough?
Well, it should be, but it's not.
I mean, I've always thought that's quite obvious, that there's 6 sources of at least, you know, I've always been a big believer in that, like certain races have been selected and their DNA has been manipulated by different sources, you know, like I mean, a lot of the ufology followers believe that the white Caucasian race has, the tall white ET race has, we have their DNA as well as human DNA, and the Japanese race has grey DNA. And it, like, if you think about it logically, there's probably something to that. But we have to wait for people like yourself, Stephen, to actually give us a bit more proof before people come out and actually discuss this. But anyway, let's get back to the hominid. So tell us about the 2 new hominid samples found in Australia and how they are the missing links that led up to Homo sapien man. I'm not sure how much knowledge our listeners have. You may want to put a little bit of a diagram, like to explain where we are on that scale. I mean, I think everybody understands the ape to human scale. We've all seen that picture a number of times.
Oh, we all have, haven't we? Yeah.
Yeah, you might just explain that to the listeners and how our 2 fit in.
Yeah. Well, basically what we've found is I've seen 2 personally. One I have, was given to me by a professor. We've seen a race. What actually took place, I won't go into details how I got to the first site, but the first site I got to had 2 beings that were buried 1 metre apart, and originally their arms were folded across their chest and their knees were brought up there, and they were facing east together. They're completely different from one another. The one that, of course, has created the most concern with the government is the one that has, well, it just basically has the largest eyes of any hominin that's been found anywhere on this planet. And that's come to me by the person who actually rebuilt the skull. It's just been rebuilt. We've taken all the bits and pieces from one of these skulls, put it back together, and we have a 3-dimensional skull we'll be showing people. It's actually going to be dried in 2 more days. And he said himself, I have never seen anything like it in the world ever. This being is unusual because, look, very simply, humans and hominins have a sutured brain. Well, we've got 3 bones that join up gradually. When we're born as children, they're not fused. That's why we don't touch the top. We all know that. What we don't understand is that is what made Lucy, with a brain capacity of about 500 cc, into what we are today, which is 1300 cc, which is 2.5 times that, because the brain can open up a bit more all the time, and because it doesn't fuse, there's room for us to build. But ladies and gentlemen, I can also make another point, that all apes and gorillas and monkeys have what's called a sagittal keel, which means their brain can never get larger. It is locked into one dimension. And of course, it makes a bit of a lie, the idea we're supposed to come from the same species. If one can never grow its brain and the other one can, they're not the same species. But that's a different story. We won't go down that line. For now, what we have with these ones we've seen is at least 2 of them don't have any suturing at all. They don't have sutures, which means they can't be a sapien and they can't be a hominin. Now, the interesting part is the one that we're interested in, the 3 that we're interested in, the 2 that I've seen, what basically takes place is when you get to the eyebrows and you have these massive eyes, from that point on, if you were to look face to face with that person, there's nothing above it. There's nothing there. Lucy has a little bit of a bulge above and a bit of a forehead. These guys have nothing. With one of them, the more extreme one, I've got a Denisovan at the moment, which has, from the eyebrow ridge, it has a rise of 6.5 centimetres. The highest rise I can get, which is about 3.5 centimetres going directly backwards, is 0.5 centimetre above the eyebrow length. And after that, it drops back down 4 or 5 centimetres and continues. What it actually means is that at least 95% of this brain that's positioned in this body is below the level of the eyes. Think of us and think about where your brain is positioned. It's nearly all above the eyes. This one, you would have to say there would be 2 to 3% of that brain that would be above eye level, and all the rest of it drops. What I also noticed with this, the one I've got at the moment, is as it starts to drop, it drops severely, so that some of that brain would be below the level of the chins and still a lot more to go. So then you ask yourself, what sort of neck does this being have? And it has to be completely different from ours. Now, amazing as that may seem, and believe me, we have pictures up, and I've got one in probably 5 meters away from me right now. And when you look at it, all you see is the two eyes and you see nothing behind it. The interesting part of the story with this being is not even the head. It's the humerus bone. And the humerus bone for me just wipes out this planet as a source. Now, the reason that is the case is because a humerus bone, which is from the shoulder to the elbow, yours and mine will measure around 30 centimeters. Gibbons have it at 35 centimeters because we know how they use their arms. And maybe LeBron or someone like that might have about 33 centimeters, okay, because they're slightly longer arms. What they will not have is 43, and when the arm is broken, and I still can't find the elbow. And that's what I found. Those two bones were thrown out the side when the government authorities put that skull back. When they put it back and they just threw the bones everywhere, they were supposed to be against the chest, but they didn't care. That bone is at least 45. Then you put on top of it the bone that goes from the elbow down to the wrist. And what you've got already is when you put the fingers below there is you have an arm that's well over 1 meter long. It will be nearly dragging in the ground. Now, that might seem quite bizarre, but maybe nature did this because these guys might be hanging out of trees, but they can't because the bone is only 1 centimeter thick.
Oh, okay.
This is the problem I've got, ladies and gentlemen, is that we measured this. I picked it up. And what was interesting, I picked up the femur first and measured it. It was 42, which is hip to knee, and I'm 42. So I'm saying this being, because you can do this sort of stuff with arms and legs, you can work out how tall they are. This being's 5'10". Take the humerus bone, and I've got to give this guy a height of around 7'10" to 8 foot.
Wow.
Because I've got a leg that tells me 5'10", and I've got an arm that tells me 8 foot something. Well, this isn't quite right. But the problem I've got, even when you throw that together, is I've got a bone that is 1 centimeter thick. And if you put the sinews and muscles on that, in this gravity, on this planet, that is a useless appendage. It won't do anything. So the question I asked when I saw this and measured it is, why would nature on this planet create a being where its biggest appendage is the arms, but they can't function? It's a useless, it won't, I mean, you threw a rock at this and you could break this arm. It's not strong enough to even carry itself around. It will just hang limply and do nothing. And then I look at the eyes, and the eyes are the largest I've ever seen. On the one I saw in the, that was buried, the widest part of the face was 10 centimeters and the eyes took up 8.8 of it. And the eyes, when you remember there's no forehead, you've basically got a pair of eyes that take up 50% of the whole face because it's got a very narrow jaw. And then I look at this and I'm saying to myself, these eyes are not functional during the daytime. They're nocturnal. So these eyes won't work during the day, but the arms won't work at any time. And then I thought to myself, where am I going to find a place that has half the gravity and no sunlight? And the obvious answer is anywhere in space but on the planet Earth. Because outside, somewhere else where the gravity was half of what it is on this Earth, then that arm of 1 centimeter is more functional. It then can have larger sinews because the gravity is not as great. That's just how it works. So when we looked at these things together, I've got a being that has a forehead that grows backwards. It doesn't go up at all. I've got arms that don't work here. I've got eyes that don't work unless it's completely dark. And I asked myself, where is my parallel on this planet? And the answer is I haven't got one. No. And then I got 2 experts. One is the top geologist in this country. He's looked at this and said this is not a Homo sapien. And I've got another guy that's just put the skull together who said it's not like anything, and he's done everything. He's worked on every type of skull there is, and he says it's not like anything else on the planet. Well, there you go. If it's not like anything on the planet, then I better look for another planet because there's nothing here that comes close.
Exactly.
And that's basically where we've got to at the moment. As I said, the skull is now formed up and into, well, I mean, I've got the original bones back, but we'll have that model for our talk in Melbourne. We won't have it for the Sunshine Coast because I've got to go back down to Sydney where it's been done at the laboratory there. And what it tells me is this, ladies and gentlemen, is that the original people in the whole of Australia, there are around about 400 to 500 tribes and 400 to 500 distinct languages and 400 to 500 distinct cultures with their own dreaming stories that belong to their land. There is only one dreaming story that can be found in Gangamaya, that can be found in Lake Mungo, can be found in Tasmania, can be found anywhere in Australia and in every tribe. And it's the story of the 7 sisters from the Pleiades. So my question is, I asked the original people, where did this skull come from? And they'll all tell me, and they have told me the same thing. It comes from the Pleiades. Why do we know this? Because this is the one story that binds every original person of the old way law together, the 7 sisters from Pleiades. And the story doesn't vary much. The Orion, which is the male that chases the sisters, is normally not a good person. Sometimes he's not too bad. Most times he doesn't get the sisters. On one occasion he does. But the trick is, in every occasion, the sisters come to Australia and land here. And then Orion chases them. But it takes place on the land. It's not up in the sky, because some people think, oh, it's talking about them going across the sky. No, it's not. I've heard all the stories. They come here. So if they come here, where do we find them? And I think we found the 3 of them. The elders told me we'd find 3 of these skulls. And I remember when I heard that to begin with, I thought that's not going to happen. But we have. And in each case, I call them no forehead people, because they don't have one. And then, of course, then you think about when you reconstruct this skull, which we're doing, we've got people who are going to put flesh on it next. Where do I put the hair?
There isn't any hair.
No, I don't think there is. I don't think there can be. So there won't be any hair. So we've got a hominin that doesn't grow hair. Hang on, they all do. And then we've got no forehead, which they all have, and sutures, which we don't have in most of these beings anyway. No, they don't fit. They don't belong here. And what I find interesting...
You haven't even discussed the skin colour, Stephen.
No, we haven't. We don't know what the skin colour is, although my understanding from the elders is they tend to feel like the Pleiadians have they keep talking about the colour blue, so I don't know if that relates to skin or not, but they do mention that a fair bit. But what we found in both these two is we found that these fine-boned beings that I think come from the Pleiades, and next to the first Pleiadian, we found a being that had a skull that was twice as thick, 13 mils as opposed to 6, and at the back had a square knob, very much like Neanderthal. And we found that in the first occasion. On the second occasion, with the skull I've got, along with the skull that was found in 1953, we think what we have there is a Denisovan. Now, what we're told is the Neanderthals and Denisovans are found in Europe, they're found in Asia, but they're never found in Australia. I believe what I'm looking at here is how Homo sapien comes out of part Neanderthal, and we know we have Neanderthal in us, part Denisovan and part Pleiadian. And what we're seeing in Australia is the mixture of Neanderthal, Denisovan and off-world together to create what we think could be what people refer to as the Adam and Eve story, but done differently. Yes.
No, that's... I can see... is this under lock and key? Because I can't imagine anyone wanting these bones to be, out there in the mainstream, to be honest.
Yeah, it is and it isn't. It's under lock and key because the first site, which is actually a burial site, the farmer, when he found this 3 years ago, went to the government. The government sent officials who took the skulls away and all the skeletons and threw them back in a heap, didn't put them back properly. And they came back to the farmer and said, there's nothing to see here, don't talk about it anymore. And then the next day some representatives came around and threatened him and told him if anyone was to come on site, he'd be put in jail. That's why there was nothing to see there. That's what you do when there's nothing worthwhile to look at. You come around the next day and threaten the farmer to be put in jail. And he actually listened to that for 2 years, kept looking at the skull and knew it wasn't a Homo sapien, which is what they said it was. Yeah. And by a variety of things that take place that I won't go through now, I got called down to have a look at it, and we actually had 1 day on site to bring it back to life again. It is under lock and key because after I did the first set of articles, I got my second letter from the government threatening to put me in jail, and the place was shut down completely. No one is allowed to look at it, and there will be no science done there.
Right. Typical.
So that site's completely cut out. The skull I've got, which is in our house right now, they cannot touch. Now, the reason for that is legally in 1963 in Australia, the original people were not counted as human beings. They were counted as flora and fauna. They were counted like kangaroos and koalas. They were not counted as people, and therefore there were no laws for them. So when these skulls were found in 1953, there was no protection for these skulls. And because they didn't make a retrospective law, the person who owned these skulls had them for about 60 years, and after 50 years, it becomes their property. It's not owned by the original people, even though it's their story. And it was given to that lady, to a professor, and then they both agreed to give it to me. So legally, they can't take that off us. The third set of skulls we've just found have been found by two people who've told no one else in the country where it is, and we're going to see them in a couple of months. And as no one else knows where they are, and I'm not going to give any clues, and I'm not going to say who they are, they won't know where they are. And what we'll do there is we'll go on with elders, we'll look at this, we'll photograph it, we'll do what we can, then we'll bury it properly and leave it with the elders to give it ceremony. With the skull I've got at the moment, I only took it off them under the condition, once the science was done, I found the location, they gave me the location where they originally came from. Once the science is done, they will be taken back there. They will not be put in museums. They'll be buried there and given to elders to look after and give ceremony. So all these skulls will go back to where they belong. But unfortunately, the first set of skulls right now belong to the Australian government, and they don't want anyone to look at them.
Yeah, typical.
Isn't it?
So I think you've answered our next question, so we can skip over that.
Okay.
So several ancient sites have been found in Australia with definitive links to the early Egyptian culture. Let's talk first about Bundjalung and the Gosford glyphs, a site I myself have spent time at in late 2015. So having read Dr. Hans Dieter von Seth's, did I pronounce that correctly? Von Seth?
I know him. I've met him, and I read his paper before it went in. Yeah, I know him quite well. Yep.
Good. Do you agree that the site, or at least a good part of it, is authentic?
Oh, I believe absolutely it's authentic, but I wouldn't fully agree with Dr. Dieter Hans' interpretation, nor even Ray Johnson's, who he got it off. But I do believe that it starts off correctly. I believe if you've been there, which you have, you'll know there are actually sort of three panels or three walls. The one that's further up that still has the stone roof above it that's nearly collapsed, I believe that's fully Egyptian. I'm not as convinced. I'm not as convinced with the other two, and I'll explain why. I got a hold of Ray Johnson's Proto-Egyptian manual of 4,200 Proto-Egyptian glyphs, and I went through them. And I went through the first wall, and I got a 90% match between what was in his manuscript, which, by the way, he sent to Egypt and was ticked off by Dr. Abu Dia Ghazi, who is the president of the Fine Antiquities of Cairo, something or other. So it was he worked with the Egyptian people, because Proto-Egyptian is the first form of hieroglyphs. And it's supposed to be 4,600 years old. I absolutely believe that the first part is a story about two boats being stranded there. There are dreaming stories that say that the Egyptians, one of the two sons of pharaohs of Khufu was Nefertari, and that he died there. He was bitten twice by a snake. I have no issue with that. I could see that written in there, and that's part of that match. But on the other two walls, I only get a 44% match, which means 56% of the glyphs do not match to Proto-Egyptian. And the reason I think that is the case is because that's a more ancient language the Egyptians learnt their hieroglyphs from, and then took their work away and then added to it and changed it as you will in a different place. I believe the more ancient glyphs on the second and third wall are a different narrative. And you'll find there are many glyphs there that have no parallel to anything Egyptian. So I believe that there's Egyptian stuff in there, and I believe, as Arnie Bev Spears told me before she passed on, and she was the last full descent Darkingyong elder, she told me our people wrote too, and the older writing belongs to us. And what the women used to do is, for thousands of years, they go up to these glyphs and would cover them in urine, women's urine, to clean them and to keep them looked after. And for a long time, between the two walls, there was a stone roof that protected it. And that stone roof was destroyed about 60 years ago. And that is why one side is quite decayed, because that's the side the water runs down, which you've probably seen, Sharon, and the other side is much cleaner and sharper, because that side has not got the weathering the other side has got. So, yeah, it's Egyptian. And, of course, above it, directly above it, the closest star map that has been mapped by Sydney Uni comes up with a date of 4,600 years ago, which is exactly when Khufu was alive. And it's directly above the glyphs, and I think the original people put that in to commemorate the arrival of those two boats. So, yeah, there is an Egyptian story there, but what people need to understand is the Egyptians came to Australia not to learn how to make pyramids, because the original people had given all that sort of stuff up a long time before. They came here for spiritual wisdom. And who came here? It was just the upper class, the elite. The sons of Pharaoh, Nefertitib and Nefertari, are supposedly two of the sons of the Pharaoh, according to both Ray Johnson and Hans Dieter. And I'm not questioning that. And I don't really, I mean, I can't read hieroglyphs. I mean, I did spend a lot of time with the book, and I could match it, and I could read what was said underneath. And I could read the story of what they said under the first wall. But the second wall, no, I don't think that's the same story they've picked up there. Because I think what happened was, they say, I know that both Hans has said this, that the reason why the second wall, there are things there that aren't quite right, but they've tried to find and turn them into glyphs, is because when the Egyptians came, they didn't have a proper scribe. I would think that if two sons of the Pharaoh were coming to a new country for the first time, the Egyptians are thorough when it comes to recording things. And if it's two sons of the Pharaoh, they would have brought a scribe that could make a decent job of it. I don't believe that.
Yes, sounds about right.
Yeah, well, that's what they both said, because, like, they say that the glyph for the UFOs, because there are about 7 of them, which we call the UFO glyphs, not me, but that's publicly what they're called. They mean jewelry and stuff like that. Well, they don't. They look marginally like it, but it's upside down and back to front and stuff like that. And a lot of the cartouches, which aren't actually cartouches, they're called syrex, the beings are facing the wrong way. And they said, oh, well, they made another mistake. They put the beings in facing the wrong way. Oh, for God's sake, even if you're a 101 scribe, you would know which way you're supposed to do them. And what's interesting is the cartouches, which are the square ones, are on the first wall. And all the other walls, they're syrex, which is rectangular ones, and they're facing the wrong way, because I believe in Australia, which is on the opposite side of the earth, they would be facing the other way. More to the point, that's the way we wrote them. The Egyptians turned them around to write them their way. But our way is opposite. All the animals and everyone faces the wrong way to their way. But that's the second and third wall, not the first. So I see differences there, and I don't think it's down to sloppy work with a chisel. I think it's down to the fact there's 2 different stories there.
Oh, that's good to know. So has the star map that is visible at the entrance in the rock underside been mapped to the night sky at all? Yeah, it has been. And they got 4,600 years. It was done by Sydney Uni, and they denied that they could find it when they went back there. What?
For quite some time. Oh, yeah, they said we lost it. We lost it. They admitted that they'd done it, but they lost the records. But what happened was the person who originally did it had a copy of that and sent them to us. And there it is, Sydney Uni, 2600 BC. And it even gave me the date that took place and the time. It gave a date when all of the stars were in alignment. So they didn't lose it. It's just that it was such an inconvenient story about a star map that goes back so far. And what's fascinating is that the size of the circle is exactly replicated in the size of the star they mapped. So the bigger stars have bigger circles and the smaller stars have smaller circles. But from where they are, they shouldn't have known that, but they did anyway. So, yeah, no, Sydney Uni, if you're listening right now, if you can't find it, I still have a copy of it for you, so you can put it back in your records. But they denied, they accepted the fact they got it, but they denied the date because they didn't have a record of it. And they said, well, we can't tell you what the date was because we don't have a record. Well, the good news is I can tell you the date, 2500 BC. And when you add 2100 to it, you get 4600, which is the time of Khufu again, which fits in perfectly with the narrative of those two sons being there. So in general terms, Ray Johnson is correct. Hans Dieter, who worked off Ray Johnson's work, is correct in general terms, but in the specifics of the last two walls, we don't think so.
Right. So once you climb through the rock and into that narrow interior, and you see the combination of both the hieroglyphics and the pictographs in all their glory, were you able to decipher the story? Or you said before you were able to decipher that there were two stories. I was wondering if you also worked out how many hands might have carved the markings, or is that something that you'd really need a team to go in and analyse?
No, three.
Three
I
people.
can tell you it's three different hands, and I'll tell you why there's three. If you look at the carving that's underneath the Egyptian part, it's finer and it's smaller and it's not as deep. When you go to the other two walls, it's far more dramatic, it's far deeper, and it's much larger. And then when you go to the other set of glyphs that are a long way away that we found, they are different again. They're about 1/3 the size of the other ones and shallower again. And they are they were done with a different hand again. So what you've got is three different types of writing that have taken place at different times. The ones we found, and by the way, the story always was that some crazy person went and did all of the fakes between those walls. Well, what about the wall we found that's got 17 glyphs? And they are all Proto-Egyptian, all of them, every one of them. Well, who did them? And the clever part is it was done as a fake. It was done with a smaller writing, 1/3 the writing, and more narrow. How clever are these people? And you know, the funny part is the person who's supposed to have done it is supposed to be an intellectually deranged Czech or Yugoslav, I'm not sure which, but that's the official version, that he is intellectually deficient. And yet he goes in there and memorizes all this Proto-Egyptian without a book and is found walking out with a chisel but no hammer. And some of these glyphs are 5 meters above where you stand. No ladder, no hammer, and he's supposed to have done this without a book. But then what he also did, this person is intellectually challenged, is went off and did another set of glyphs hundreds of meters away, smaller, to talk about where they were buried, where Nefertari was buried. How clever is that? And the one that's there makes a complete narrative about where he was buried. That is pretty smart for someone who knows nothing about anything and failed every test he did at school. And when he was found by the person who found him, he chastised him and told him to go off and don't do it again. And that was the sum total of the punishment, because he was so slow, they figured, oh, I can't put him in jail because he doesn't get it. But he was smart enough to put up this elaborate hoax, 3 different ways of writing, 3 different styles. So there's at least 3 there, one for the Egyptians, the one that's a long way away, and the other 2 walls seem to be consistently of the same. And what's fascinating is, Sharon's probably seen this too, there are perfect circles there, which you can't do with a straight chisel blade, because you'll see little points.
I seriously don't know how they did any of it with a chisel. I mean, I put my fingers into some of those grooves, and the only part of it that I thought might be a hoax was FOF. Because,
it is.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Because
it's not. Okay. All the God symbols are symbolic, and then all of a sudden, it could be a nervous at somebody. You've got a complete God symbol holding an ankh in one hand and something in the other. It's near the Egyptian part there. And I've told people after people that does not fit in with the narrative, because the narrative of gods is always symbolic, never specific like that. More to the point, that particular carving, I've seen pictures of it without the ear. And that is the one they've all used. They've used this to say it's fake, because look, here it is in one stage and here it is in another stage where more's been added on. They've used that deliberately to discredit the whole story by saying, look at this. And when you look at it, it doesn't fit in because it's separate from the rest of the writing to begin with. It's not part of anything else, and it's massive and far bigger than any other glyph by a factor of 5 or 6. Yeah. It's not symbolic, it's specific. And it doesn't fit in with symbols for gods. It's actually a depiction of a god. It doesn't belong. And it was put in later by people. And you're right, Sharon, well picked up. And if you see it and you take anyone there, tell them not to even look at it, because it destroys the story to an extent, because then it asks questions, because it doesn't belong. It's not part of the story. It should never have been there. And they've done it I can't say they've done it deliberately because I'm not going to go down a conspiracy theory, but someone's done it in bits and pieces. And what it's done is fed the story about the fact that the whole thing is fake because one glyph is. The other 300, nothing to do with it, and the other 300 are ancient. And plus, the most important part of this story is I asked the elders, and they all said the same thing. It's the Egyptians and us that did it. Well, can't we just go with that? Why do we have to go further and go and ask experts to come in 1983 to give an opinion when the elders have already given one, and they were living there long before 1983? They were living there for hundreds of thousands of years. You'd think they'd have a better idea about it, wouldn't you?
You certainly would. Now, I know you found the fact that the gods were depicted as half animal, half human intriguing. Why is that intriguing?
The gods, hang on, which one is half? Help me a bit on this one.
They were depicted as animal head, human body, and apparently previously they usually show the creature or the god without the.
I'm with you. I know the one you're talking about now. I've got you. Okay, sorry, I didn't realise, but yeah, the one I find the most intriguing is I've seen quite a few depictions of Thoth. One we've seen of Thoth in ape form, where there's a ibis footprint alongside it and an ankh, and it's in ape form. And there's another one where he's got 1 foot shorter than the other, which is the form of Duramulin, who's the son of Byami, which is Thoth. And that's part of that which we recognise straight away. But then when we get to the top, it turns into an ibis head, and it's done with one eye profile, like the Egyptians do it. Now, original people never do profile. They always do both eyes. And I always said to myself when I saw that one, whoa, that's not right. That's just not how it's done. We always do both eyes showing. Well, this one only has one eye, and it's got the ibis beak, which is, as you know, the two forms of Thoth is ibis form and ape form. We've got them both in Australia. And we've got a Duramulin in ape form, like a baboon face. And again, with that one, it's one eye again. But every other depiction of a being I've ever seen is always both eyes. So you ask yourself, why are these two in one eye? Because that's very much part of that Egyptian story we're talking about again. So it sort of just reinforces that contact we have with Egypt and Australia. In fact, to be honest, there are probably at least 15 sites we know of that have Egyptian evidence about them, apart from Carry On. Yeah. To the stage now where we actually don't even talk about Egypt and Australia because we just feel it's such an obvious part of the story of this country. But I'm very happy to talk about it now, of course. That's a given. But really, for all intents and purposes, the Egyptian people came here. I even know the dates. I can be specific to within 10 years for how long they were here. They came here around 4,600 years ago. That's when Khufu was around, and that's when the star map is there. And they left 400 years ago when they broke the law. I know when they broke the law, I know where it happened and what took place. And actually what took place is when the Egyptians came to Australia, there were 4 ports that they landed in and then were allowed to go to different places from there. And the one in Sydney, there's one in Gosford, one down in Kangaroo Island, one up the top. The one in Sydney is the one where you go inland. And they went inland to Pitjantjatjara country, which is right in the middle. And 400 years ago, we're not dealing with this Isis and Osiris. We're dealing with different types of people then. They stole 3 sacred rocks in the middle. And the warriors tracked them all the way back from the middle of Australia to the coast near Sydney. And when they got on the coast, they killed them and speared them all and told the Egyptians never to come back. And they didn't. And that was the end of the time in Australia. So the Egyptians were here continually for 4,200 years. Always there was someone here. And with treaty. There was a treaty, and I've seen it. I've had it in my hand. There was an actual treaty between the Egyptian people and the original people that gave them the right to be in Australia. Mind you, the British invasion force that came to Australia have never signed a treaty with the original people. So legally, and many Aboriginal people have said this to me, will tolerate an Egyptian embassy, but not a British one, because they have no right to be here. And legally, because the Egyptians acknowledged the Aboriginal people in a legal form as a nation over 4,000 years ago, when the British came here and said the place was terra nullius because there was no one here of any worth or any law, that was a lie. There was a nation here that had already been acknowledged by another civilization. So that becomes an issue too, which is one of the reasons why all the stories about carry-on and Egyptians are always covered up here.
Yeah,
because they want this to go too far, because there's a political part to this, because the original people believe they're still a sovereign nation, and because no treaty was signed, the British still don't have a right to this nation.
So is this the reason, Stephen, why they bulldozed the Gympie Pyramid?
Bulldozed, well, they nearly have, but they are going to do it now for sure. It's been spoken about for quite some time. The Department of Main Roads are now in the process as we speak, where they're going to bulldoze the whole of the Gympie Pyramid and destroy it for good. And that pyramid has 7 steps on it. I've been on it with Graham Hancock, and he told me the stonework here is exactly the same as Machu Picchu. I've never been there. That's what Graham said, and as you know, Graham has been there. We went to the top, which is a magical healing site. And remember, the original people don't call it a pyramid, they call it the healing place. And it's the place on the site where I've heard stories about people who were in wheelchairs that were wheeled up there that ran down the hill after they laid in that healing site. So what people don't understand is the pyramid was put there, like the Egyptians and others, because it was on a sacred place, and very powerful ley line sat there and still sits there to this day. And it would be dangerous and catastrophic to destroy the site, but we're within months of that happening. I think that basically now the Gubbi Gubbi, the Waka Waka, which are the 2 tribes that look after that area, they've run out of ways of stopping them. They know it's sacred, and they know it's not an Egyptian pyramid as such. It's much older than that. Because as you know, to begin with, the pyramids in Egypt were more dirt than they were anything else. This goes back a long, long way. And it's where the Egyptians got the idea of pyramids from. But yeah, at the moment, we're looking at a very dreadful situation where the government is going to destroy it for good. And once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
Welcome
talking about healing tables, I might take that offline with you, and we'll have a chat and see maybe we can do something with the magazine to help those people. Talking of healing tables, as I was following my guide at the glyphs, we left from the front road at Woy Woy, and about 20 minutes in, I had to stop. I was in a group of, there was 3 men and myself, and it was the weirdest thing. We're about 20 minutes in walking. It was a slow walk because he was doing a bit of a bush tucker thing at the same time. I had this huge cool tunnel of air come out of nowhere to my left, and I turned around, and it was just a bit of bush area. But I asked the guys if they could hold 5 while I investigated, because I knew that something was there. And when I kind of walked through, I think I found the healing table.
You may have found a healing table, but the healing table, the one that I've taken 20 women to, is found directly above the glyphs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I'm not saying. Look, I've seen a picture of Richard Clark that put up a couple of days ago, laying on another table, where there was so much light coming out of him. It was unbelievable. There's more than one, but the main healing table is about 100 meters away from the glyphs, and it's above it. You've got to climb up above it, and it's a women's healing table, only for women. In fact, there's a point where you can't walk as a man. It's dangerous to walk past that point, and to lay in that healing table would be absolutely catastrophic if you knew. If you were ignorant about it, you wouldn't have an impact either way. And on that site, I've taken 20 women. Sorry?
We did actually, our guide took us up there. But good. We didn't lay down. Yeah, he took us, I climbed up. The people I was didn't climb up. It was similar. I was the only one that was up there, which is probably good if it was the healing table. But the guide and the guys went down, but there was like a dungeon area too, or a basement area, but it had just flooded, so we weren't able to go down. But yeah, I went up to the top. That's right, but I didn't lie down on it. But it did feel pretty amazing up there. So
you should have laid on it, because I can tell you the women who do lay on it, I've put 20 women on there, and 19 of them came away with life-changing experiences, and the 20th woman was a girl that hadn't had a period and she wasn't a woman. Therefore, I sort of knew when she was going to have a go. I thought, I don't think you're going to get anything here, dear, but I let her go anyway. The women that have been on there, I don't ask them anymore because they come back laughing and so content, and they always tell me the same thing. Utterly amazing for women. But what I will say this, it's women of good intent. I wouldn't put a woman there that I thought wasn't of good intent. I wouldn't introduce it to them. Obviously, in your case, Sharon, that wouldn't be a problem. But I can guarantee you, it doesn't matter whether you lay on that trough that you've seen is just so artificial. It doesn't belong to the rock. It doesn't matter whether you lay on there, whether it's 40 degrees or 20 degrees. It's never hot. It's never cold. It doesn't matter how hot it is. You can lay on that rock and it's cooler. And when it's cold everywhere else, it's warmer there. But the stories I've heard, and I don't ask the women because it's their dreaming, but I can tell you that that particular dreaming site there is very Pleiadian, for one. That's been something that's been common from a lot of the women there. But secondly, I remember Uncle Jerry, who was one of the custodians of that site, said that if a woman was to lay there for long enough, they'd be healed of every sickness they've ever had. Wow. So it does. But the women, because they're in groups, they only get, say, 5 minutes per person when there's a few of them together, because the men, I have to take the men away and we go down to where the star chart is, because we're not allowed to be within certain distance, because that's women's business. And if a man was to interrupt that business, nothing good would come from it. They'd be in strife. So we have to keep away while they do that. But I can tell you, Sharon, next time you go there, when you do go there, go up there and lay there for 5, 10, 15 minutes, and I would be extremely surprised if something quite strong and powerful and illuminating didn't take place.
Cool. No, I definitely want to go back now. The other one, which is about 20 minutes in on the left-hand side, there's actually a bit of a post as a marker, and if you ever go back, I know you've gone a few times, so you probably don't have it on your to-do list.
25, 30.
Yeah, I was going to say there'll be a few visits there. I lay on that table, and it was like granite, and it had like a 30-degree angle, and that was an amazing feeling too. So I think you're right. There seem to be a few of them around. But no, I thought it was odd that the men didn't feel the cool air, but I did. I thought, and since then I've been told that it's women's business. So I'm wondering,
You've just worked that out. The men won't feel a thing, because this is really a powerful creation site. And even where you found that when you were taken up above there is a men's place there too. It's over near the star chart there, but it's much smaller and nowhere near as powerful. It is powerful, but nowhere near as powerful as that site. That site's just off the air when it comes to what happens to people. My understanding is that a lot of that site, as much as a lot of people like to think it's men's business, it's not really. It's not really. My understanding is most of it is women's business. I mean, even the site called Bundjalung, and everyone fusses over the site of Thoth. What they don't see is the person who runs the law, because there's about 15 engravings there, is a woman who's in an opposite position, who's pregnant and holds the tail of the biggest kangaroo. Now, the kangaroo is what represents for Aboriginal people law. And what that tells me is the woman is controlling the law. Yeah, Thoth looks pretty deadly. He's got the moon in one hand and the sun in the other and doing the things that Thoth does. But it's the woman in that particular engraving, which is about 3 k's away from the glyphs, that is running the show. So we've got to be very careful, because the men are very quick to pick up the fact that it belongs to them. But when you look very closely, most of the really powerful sites are women's sites. They're not men's sites. So the fact that women feel really comfortable at the glyphs But I must make one point about the glyphs, and I would make this, and I've said this many times before. When you go between those walls, if it's a woman on their own, don't stay there a long period of time. You'll get sick. And it's happened a couple of times. No, this is the one occasion between the walls. When you went between the walls, were you with a man?
In the lower section, yes, there were three.
Good. That's what's got to happen. Because if you're left on your own, if you're left on your own between those walls, you will get sickness. Okay?
It's interesting because I've been a second time. First, the original time I went, I actually was with a lady and another man. And the lady who was with me, she got major migraine and had to leave. Yep. She just left the area. Yeah.
All right. Well, then she wasn't accepted as you were. But if there was no man there, she wouldn't have got a major migraine. It would have knocked her over. Okay. And then you may have been not as sick, but we know for a fact, I know on one occasion Evan made the mistake when he took some people there. He didn't realise one woman had stayed behind, and by the time he got to her, she was laying on the ground. Oh. It's not a place where women, this is the one place, gentlemen, I might have been talking a lot about women, where we do have a function. When it's between the walls, we are called for and we are needed. When it goes up to the women's site, we're not needed. Clear off. We're not part of that, because that will make us really sick. So what I'm getting at is quite interesting. If you go down further to the grandmother tree, that's a woman's site again. So it's really mixed up. Yeah.
I've got a great photo of me peeking out behind it, but I actually am sitting on right at the base of it too. And I actually got a beautiful rock from there too that just kind of fell on me. I don't know how it just fell on me from the tree. It was like a really and I brought it home with me in the end because I thought I was meant to be.
that tree is the biggest Angoffer I've seen anywhere in Australia, and it's sacred as anything. And before that tree, there would have been another one again. It is so sacred, so powerful. When I take people to the glyphs, everyone has to hold that tree and introduce themselves to that tree. And there was one occasion where one person wouldn't do it. I said, well, you go back to the cars. I'm not taking you anywhere. You don't talk to the tree. You don't come. Because that would be bad medicine for me and bad medicine for him. Because that place is incredibly sacred, irrespective of what the government says. It's very powerful for Aboriginal people, and it's very powerful for non-Aboriginal people too. And like I said, the women's side up the top there, so I've taken Aboriginal women there, and I've taken many non-Aboriginal women, and they all get a reaction. It doesn't matter about colour for this fella, or this lady, I should say. And it's the same for the men's side too. It is a very powerful site, and it needs to be looked after better than it is.
Yes, definitely.
Star maps have been destroyed. Some of them have been dug out. There's been a lot of desecration there. People have scribbled on the walls. These things don't go well with the spirits that guard that. And I know that for a fact. There are spirits there that guard those places, and they are not happy. And I'm going to make a statement here that if anyone goes to that site and desecrates it, good luck. Because I can tell you now, you might think you get away with a desecration, but when you go home, look out for the bad luck and bad health that comes, because it will.
No, I was quite fortunate. We had a good guide. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he was, we basically asked permission everywhere as we were going through. And
was it Jake Tessar?
Long dreadlocks, green hat, floppy hat.
The bush tucker man.
Yeah, that's him. He was having a real issue with the council at that moment. They were trying to actually develop the land at that point. Yeah. It was a few years back.
It was going to become condominiums, and they were going to build all over the place and destroy completely. Yeah, they were. Yeah, and he was fighting that. Pretty sure it was him. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a lovely man.
That'd be him.
Yeah, he was like, when we went, he was a bit disappointed because he'd lost the battle, and he was a bit displated because the government was very oppressive at that point. But I'm hoping it all got better, but I'm not sure if it did.
It did again. See the point. even with the standing stone site, when it was going to be developed, subdivided into 465 buildings and stuff, the spirit stepped in and stopped it. The same with what happened at Carryong, when we all thought we were going to lose it for good and it wasn't going to be protected. It finally was protected. It's like, as much as the people that know what this place is like want to destroy it, they're dealing with spirits and with powers they really can't defeat, and they always get protected. The place is semi-protected, but the desecration, it needs to be guarded. And to be honest, what needs to happen is people should go in with a guide. They should be taken in with a guide and brought out with that same guide. And we should be told, if you're not with a guide, you shouldn't be there. I really would like to see that happen. I mean, I'm happy for all sorts of people to go to some of those sites. There's some I won't talk about today because I think they're more sacred and they're not meant to be visited, because that place has got so many sacred sites. But hey, we all know where the glyphs are now. Why fight it? Let's look after it as best we can. My way of doing this was we would have mainly Darkinjong people from that group, and other non-original people who act as guides, who take people in and bring them out. And they get a great day out of it. And they get to see it properly, and then they come back out. And then we would say to them, you don't need to go in on your own. You've seen it. And that should be enough. That's how it should be. Exactly.
Look, and I completely agree. So Stephen, would you mind telling our listeners about the Duramulin platform and why it's so special?
Well, there's a couple, but there's two. There's a Bundjalung one which has Duramulin there, and there's also another one further up. But I think the one we're probably talking about is the one that is Duramulin. That's called the Bundjalung site.
I think that's the one. Yes.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about it is I know the dreaming story for that was given to me by both Arnie Bev and Gabby Duncan. So we know the story that goes with that. And what it is, and I told you before, there's about a pregnant woman there with holding the kangaroo. Well, that's the law part. So the woman is running the show again. Her name is called Mula Mula. She's the wife of Bayami, which is the great creation god. What's interesting about the Duramulin site is that you've got this figure, which is Thoth, which is Duramulin is the son of Bayami. So it's Thoth, the god of wisdom. He has the sun in one hand and moon in the other, which is what Thoth does. And he's standing on top of a canoe. Now, what the rangers have put there is they've put a bulwark around it, and they've said they're all different things. They've said this is a canoe and this is a being. And at one stage they said he was holding a Woomera, but it wasn't. It's Orion's belt through the middle, and they came through there. And what's interesting about this is that the canoe is about 9 meters long. It is the largest canoe that's been engraved into a rock anywhere in Australia. Now, they call it a canoe, but Gabby Duncan and Arnie Bev Spears said, no, it's a spaceship. It represents a spaceship, and it's the story of Bayami, Duramulin, coming through the Milky Way to Australia and landing, because the Pleiadians came to Australia first. They chose this place because they were looking for a hominid, and this is what people don't always get. They look upon the Pleiadians as being far superior. That is not the story I was given. That is their equal. And we teach them something, and we have a quality, and I know what that quality is, that we taught them. So they came here looking for this place, and it's a story of Bayami, his son Duramulin, and all of them coming here and making their way to Australia. And what the National Parks and Wildlife says, it's a fishing boat. Well, it's not a fishing boat. 9 meters, for God's sake, no one's done a canoe that big. It's so big. And what's interesting is they keep the story of Duramulin, who's got 1 foot, 1 inch away from the canoe, standing on it. Well, they made that separate. They didn't put the two together. No way. They didn't do that. They put another engraving, or sort of another plaque about 9 meters away around the corner where the canoe finishes, to say, oh, this is a canoe. No, it's part of the same thing. In fact, the whole of the engraving is one story. They just read as, that's a fish, that's a kangaroo. No, man, they're all there for a reason. It was there I learned something I never knew. Gabby Duncan told Ancient Aliens when they came here to do a story, and they never put it up. He said, see those kangaroos? I said, yeah. He said the Pleiadians brought them. They're different to any other animal. They brought them from the Pleiades and brought them to Australia.
Did they bring the platypus too? Because I don't
know about that, but I can tell you that one of the kangaroos is in that so-called fishing boat that Byam is standing on, or Durham standing on. The kangaroo's standing in it too, and somehow they got that out of it too. And there's 3 of it there. Yeah.
That is the weirdest creature on the planet. Everyone agree with me here. The platypus, it's odd. It doesn't.
Well, so does the kangaroo. The kangaroo can actually be pregnant for 5 years and hold the baby back because it doesn't feel like having a baby. Ladies, how would you feel about that one? And when it does give a baby, it gives it after 2 days and it sits in a pouch. And I always say to the women, which is a better pregnancy, ours or theirs? And all the women, as one, always vote for the kangaroo's way of making kids. But you think about that. There's no other animal on the planet that can say, oh, we've got a drought, I won't fall pregnant. Even though I've been impregnated and I have a baby there, I will not give it up. That's not what animals do on this planet. But the kangaroo is so different. I never thought of that, and it never dawned on me until I had Gary Duncan, who actually had his grey kangaroo coat, which means he was talking as a lawman. And when you talk as a lawman, you don't lie about your culture. And unfortunately, H.E. Aylands didn't take much of his talk, which was brilliant. They didn't cover it because it didn't fit what they were looking for, which wasn't the right thing anyway. But what was fascinating for me is I'd never thought about the kangaroo until then. So that's what's interesting about that site, because when you start to look at it, it gives us a lot of history of where we came from, and then it gives us the history of one of the animals that we've got. And let me give an example of another animal in Australia called the dingo, which, Sharon, I'm sure you're familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with the fact that it's not related to any dog or wolf in the world?
Yes, I did know that.
Yeah, Sydney Uni found this out when they did a mitochondrial DNA study, and they announced that it is not a dog, it's not a wolf, and it doesn't belong to anything else on the planet. And you know what they did after that? Nothing. They didn't go any further. What should have the scientists done? They should have thought about this and thought, well, where did it come from? But they didn't want to think about it anymore because it wasn't what they thought. They thought, they knew it was related to a dog in India, and that's what they were going to prove. And when they found out it wasn't related to anything, when it asked you so many questions about where did it come from, what's going on here, did the Pleiadians bring this dingo also? We'll never know. But what I can tell you, original people treat a dingo like they treat a human. They actually, a lot of tribes had dingoes, communities and tribes that lived with them, and they fed them and hunted together. And what also happens sometimes, if a woman ever lost their baby, they would take a dingo pup and suckle it and feed it like would feed their own babies. So, and they are treated by law to be equal with humans. So you sort of wonder, the dingo doesn't relate to anywhere on the planet like my skull doesn't. Well, if you can't find a relation on the planet, maybe we need to look for another planet. See, this is a story that turns up a lot in Australia, genetically.
Yes. Yeah, well, evidently. So now, when you first entered that crypt of the Pharaoh's son, could you tell us a little bit about the feeling? Did you have a distinct feeling that it was a special place, or do you have this a lot when you first go and view something that somebody's put you onto?
It depends on the site. Whether you're talking about the 10-metre shaft that's buried in, dug into the back of the glyphs.
Yeah, the one that's the Pharaoh's son, the crypt of the Pharaoh's son.
Nefertari, yeah. And we actually do have a bone that was given to us that we've taken to CAT scans, and it's been looked at by hospitals and experts, and they told me it's a human bone and it's incredibly ancient. We have that, and an elder gave me that, and I suspect it was found at the actual opening of where the crypt is that you go to. I suspect it's his bone, and the place was robbed some time ago, but it's 10 metres. It's been cut into the back and into this. Now, I can tell you, and I've got to be fair about this, you should always do both sides of the story. There is an official explanation by the government about this 10-metre shaft. For a while, they used to say it was natural, and everyone just said, oh, give me a break. And they knew in the end they couldn't get away with that. It's not natural. It's been cut sheer on each side, and it's parallel for 10 metres. It's the same distance apart, 90 degrees on both sides. It's been perfectly cut. You can see the chisel marks in it. It's not natural. And finally, now they've put up a new explanation, which is the official explanation. It was made by vandals.
What?
The vandals crawled into the bush, really remote place, got their chisels out and dug into it, and then took all of the fill away. They didn't leave it at the end there. They took it away and put it in the bush somewhere, cleaned it all out, and didn't even tag it. It was done by vandals. That is the official explanation. But if you ask them for the name of a vandal, they won't give you one. They just say, well, that's what happened. It was vandals who did it. So that is the official explanation. There's no stat deck by the vandals, by the way. No name of the vandals. But you know what I've said many times, please, when you find these vandals, could you bring them to my place? Because they work for nothing, do a fantastic job. And I've got a lot of work on my farm I'd like done. And I'd like these vandals to work on my farm too, because they tidy up when they're finished, and they made a fantastic collar. I believe, without a doubt, that it was for some time the burial place of Nefertari, because that's what's written on the front. In fact, where that particular passage is, if you were to go a quarter of a metre further, you'd be at the actual end of the tunnel. But inside, you've got to get inside, and you've got to drop down when you go in there. It's, I suppose, the problem, you're going to be disappointed with this, the problem we had when we went in there is we went up one side, and there was a guy in front of me called Gavin who went up one side, and we got up to one side, and there were 100 spiders there, and it was pretty freaky. We got out of there in a hurry. So it wasn't the sublime experience you're expecting there, where all of a sudden a light came upon us and we saw Nefertari standing in front of us. It was a busload of spiders, and they were pretty bloody big too. And it sort of gave you the impression, you started to realise there must be more of them around, and we're crawling around it. Let's get out of here. But, I mean, I can tell you National Parks and Wildlife at one stage filled it up completely with rocks, and then it was unfilled. I don't know how. Well, I do actually, but I'm not going to say it publicly, when we went in there. And then it was filled up again, and now it's completely filled. It's been completely filled with rubbish, and now no one can get into it anymore. The reason being, if you got in there, you'd say, this is not normal. This is not natural. So therefore, they've destroyed it.
So the vandals came back then? No,
not the vandals, the government.
Yeah, exactly.
National Parks and Wildlife filled it up. They said it could be dangerous. People could fall down the entrance, so they filled it up. No, I wish the vandals did come back, because if they come back, they clean it out again. No, it's the government, the real vandals.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we've covered the next question. That's wonderful, about the ocean-going boat. Now, the Ramindjeri elders had made a very big claim, Stephen, which most Australians would be a bit stunned about. Do you want to share that?
Can you tell me what the claim is first? Because they've made a few of them. What's the one you've got?
Oh, mine was in relation to the datings of the axe finds, and there's the, what was it? Life on the planet originated on our continent, really, basically.
Basically. Look, what happened was, when I was taken down, the Ramindjeri contacted me through a Ramindjeri person up there. They read our books, and they asked me to go down there. And I spent over a week down there where they just told me stuff and just watched what was going on. And then at the finish, when I had I always carry this clipboard I write with paper and pen. Sorry about that, guys, but that's how I do things. And Karno, there was quite a few elders there, probably about a dozen or so. And they were sitting in circle doing ceremony. Karno came up and grabbed the clipboard and said, threw it away, and said, enough of this white fella stuff. And then they gave me ceremony. And at the end of it, they gave me directions on what I was to do, on what I was to find, and told me how I was to go about it. And they started to talk about the Pleiadians coming here. And we spoke about boats, and I remember one of the elders, Peter Evans at the time, said to me, he said, but that's not the only way we travel to the Earth. We know, there are other ways, aren't you? I said, yeah, I do, but I'm not going to do them. I'm not going to talk about the Pleiades. I'm not going to talk about UFOs. That is not what I'm going to do. But what brought me down there was he claimed that the original people had circumnavigated the world in a figure eight. Now, what's interesting about that is, obviously I thought, hang on for a sec, this is interesting. And it went back hundreds of thousands of years ago. But if you look at how you would circumnavigate the world, it will be in a figure eight. It actually, that's what the currents will do. And they told me, they'd explained to me how it was done. I assumed it was done by boat. They made it clear it was done by boat and by vehicle above the water, both ways. And the reason they went in that passage is because it's a ley line. They follow the lines, the sacred lines that crisscross this earth. This planet has so many powerful magical lines where they build, well, as you know, they build the pyramids on there, they build churches on there. Well, the churches kill the lines, by the way, and the original people build their ceremonies on there, and they traveled through that, and they used that energy. What I thought it was, is I thought it was they circumnavigated the world in a figure eight and took their genes to the rest of the world, which they did. I thought it was by boat. They told me it was by boat and by ship. But I mean ship that actually flies as opposed to boat that doesn't. So they did it both ways. So that's what actually originally got me down there. That was the promise they would give me, the full story to that, which they did. And in return, I was given my first ceremony. I believe my son tells me, because I've forgotten, I've had 5 now, which gives me some right, and Evan some right, because he's had most of them too, to speak on behalf of the Aboriginal people, because we do get these ceremonies. And what's consistent, we've done a disappearing ceremony, and I still to this day don't know how I disappeared, nor the others, but it did happen. That was on a certain day, and with an elder that knows how to do this stuff, and I still don't know how to do it, but we did it then. Those ceremonies always link in with one thing. Every time we do a ceremony, we're always told to look up to the stars and to the Pleiades. They're always linked into part of that story too. So that's where our narrative, which until I did ceremony, we hadn't mentioned the Pleiades and travelling by spaceship anywhere. That's where it began there. And I remember saying to Peter, I'll never talk about it. And he laughed at it and he said, you have no choice and you will. I said, no, I'm not going down the Von Daniken way and getting smashed like he does. I'm not going to touch that. And he laughed at it again. He said, you will have no choice in this. And Peter, you were right and I was wrong.
Yes, I think a lot of us feel that, but it's after a while you just get used to the fact that, you know, it's kind of an honour to have been chosen, though, don't you feel?
Absolutely, and of course it's an honour, but a lot of people get chosen. They don't all follow through with it because there's been a lot of hassle as we've done this. I can assure you, as you probably know, it's not just threats from the government. I've had death threats, and I'm not talking about singular. I've had death threats. We've had all sorts of things that have happened, but they're part of the deal. That's part of the honour. Every now and then you get tested and you have to stay strong to what you believe to be true, and that's what we do. I mean, when I go on to country, I always make sure I speak to an elder of the old way law, and I get my direction from them, and I make sure that what I do and what I say is in accord with the people I believe. And see, it's really simple to do the archaeology we do because we get asked there. We don't have to look. They take us there and they give us the answer. All we've got to work out are the questions. Whereas when other people go there, they haven't got a clue what they're doing. Well, in our case, because we believe the elders, and you've got to remember, it's the oldest culture on the planet, and it has an oral tradition. It also has a written tradition because our rocks, it's written on there. It has it both ways. And there is something you've got to understand, ladies and gentlemen. In Australia, most tribes don't have a word for lying. And if people tell the truth and everyone's telepathic, then the stories don't change because they're not allowed to change. You can't tell a lie, and you never tell lies about the spirits because the spirits will know, because original people believe the spirits are in everywhere. They're in the grass, they're in the trees, they're in the birds, they're everywhere. And when you lie to the spirits, they tell someone else and you get found out. So if everyone believes that in this country, and they did until the whites came, then you find what you have is a history that never changes and is truthful. So it's easy for us to do archaeology. We go where the elders tell us and we take their story as the answer. Then all you've got to do is fill it in with a couple of questions and a couple of clever comments and a couple of pictures, and it's easy.
Wouldn't that be perfect? It really would.
Oh, it is.
So, yeah. So now let's talk about axe finds. Surely the datings of axe finds within the Australian region, we're including PNG here, should convince many that life on our planet originated on our continent. I mean, I'll just go through the list that you that I found in one of your articles, Stephen. The Huon Terrace, PNG, 40,000 years.
Yeah.
Your Walden Land, Northern Territory, 35,500 years. Sandy Creek, Queensland, very close to me, 32,000 years. Malangang, oh God, I can't. Malangang, Northern Territory, 23,000 years. And the handheld chopper, 60,000 years. And the closest that mainstream history and archaeology has found was the one in Noah Cave, Sarawak, Malaysia. And that was only 15,500.
Yeah. And there's a possibility there's something in Japan that might be 20. Yeah. And there's been another axe that's been found in Jaywin country, which has been dated at 65,000 years now.
Wow. Okay.
The question is, because an axe, if you think about it from stone to technology, the axe is basically the most important tool there is. And what you're suggesting is, how is it that all the axes are found and choppers are found in Australia first before they're found anywhere else? It's simply because most stone technology begins in Australia. And it's found all over. It's found 40,000 years, 65,000 years. And in other countries, it's much younger. And what that basically tells us is that when you start to look for the beginning of culture, for stone tool technology, for religion, all these things begin in the same country. So it's a concrete piece of evidence that reminds us once again that no matter which way you look at this, it always comes back to Australia first and what goes out of Australia. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, think about it. What was the last country to lose the hunter-gatherer lifestyle? Which was the last continent that held on to the first dreaming in the first way? It was Australia. America went before Australia and then Australia. Why were we the last? Because we were the first. And that's why it held out the longest. We also believe that the original people obviously went around the world, and they were in many other places. We found skeletons of them through the whole of America. That's a given. We found them in the oldest Homo sapien found in Asia is in Penang Cave, and it's an original person. You go to the Andaman Islands, the original people are still there. Quite recently, they did a DNA study of Dr. Rao did it in India, in the southern part of India, and found 7 people there that had unique Australian Aboriginal mitochondrial DNA signatures. They weren't even Indian to this day. So they were everywhere, spreading their genes from way back. And those genes, as I said, with Lake Mungo, the genes of Lake Mungo have what are all Europeans. Well, one of those original people went towards Europe, and as it got colder, then the noses start to collapse a bit more because you've got to conserve more heat, and you start to lose the pigmentation in your skin, and you start to create the Caucasian race. And that comes out of what we can see now from Lake Mungo, from a being was part of that. So those things take place as they spread around the world, and as they go around the world, the original people were sharing everything they had. And that includes, ladies and gentlemen, something you might surprise you, bows and arrows. You only have to read Captain Cook's diary on the day he raised his flag at Botany Bay, and he wrote in there that we saw a man walk down the hill, an original man, with a bow and a bundle of arrows, and it said it's the first we've seen in this country. That was on the east coast of Australia. Now, you read the books and you will be told by everyone the original people never had bows and arrows.
Yeah.
I would say to you, try and kill a kangaroo or wallaby with a bow and see how you go in an arrow. It might scratch. It might be an inconvenience, but it will not stop them from jumping because they're very thick. Throw a death spear and you will stop them. So what point and what use was a bow and arrow? But they had them. They were here. So what I'm sort of saying is, to an extent, that even simple bits of history, like the original people had a toolkit that didn't have a bow and arrow, not according to Captain Cook. He's the one who said they had them there, and said we saw them as we stood on the deck of the ship. So it wasn't just Cook maybe hallucinating by taking mushrooms or something else like that. All of them saw it, and they all comment on the fact that's the first one we've seen. And by the way, that's funny. I've read that in books that were given to schools. Yet
Really?
the teachers would tell them that they just had spears and they never had bows and arrows, because to an extent the axe is the highlight of what you can do with stone, but with wood, the highlight you can do outside a gun is a bow and arrow. And because the original people didn't have a bow and arrow, that makes them lesser people. So therefore we can't mention that, can we? Because that destroys the myth of the original people being ignorant and uncultured and all the things that made it terra nullius for 200 years. Because terra nullius means people unworthy of the land. They had a bow and arrow.
Yeah, just incredible. I mean, there are so many Australians that have no idea about any of this, Stephen. It's just incredible. Now, we're about to wrap this up, so I might just give your upcoming event details and contacts again. So if you would like to see Stephen and Evan in person, they will be presenting on the skulls, Slater and the standing stones, genetics and the sacred stones on the 8th of November at 6:30 p.m. at the Kawana Forest Meeting Place, and that's in Meridian Plains. And on the 17th of November at 7 p.m. at the Leinster Grove Community Centre, which is in Thornbury in Victoria. And you can go check out the website at www.forgottenorigin.com, or on Facebook, just search for Forgotten Origin. And Stephen, I have barely scratched my questions. Would you like to come back and do another show down the track?
Yeah, I mentioned when you wrote your 52 questions, I said, man, it's going to be hard, because one thing I'm renowned for is not brevity of answers when I'm answering something. So I didn't think you'd get through 52. That would have been two minutes per question. Yeah, I'm happy to come back and talk to you guys. I enjoyed it. It was good fun. And well researched too. I've got to give you credit for that. That's amazing research you've done. So I'm more than happy to come back whenever it suits you. Yeah,
this is one of my passionate areas. I mean, I'd love to get out to more sites. I've been doing my best to go and check out sites as I get to certain locations. I'm off to New Zealand and Tassie in January, and so if there's anything down there, send me a link and I'll go check it out down there if you know of anything.
Yeah, no worries. We can do that for you. There's people down there that could help you doing that. No worries.
Yeah, I think it's important that more of us get this information out.
Well, it's our ancestry. It's our heritage. We are all. If people lie to us about where we come from and who we are, do we trust them with other things? It's sort of symptomatic of something, but people can't make a decision about themselves and who they are as beings. Winston Churchill said that. It's quite amazing. He said something about the fact if we don't understand our history, we will never understand ourselves. Well, that's what we're trying to say to people. Come on, guys, work out where we come from, who we are, and that we aren't really vicious, nasty pieces of work that enjoy warfare, killing, and being scared of one another. There was a time when everyone could speak the same language that was telepathic, and everyone treated everyone with respect, and there was no warfare. Which one do you want? That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, definitely does. So, Sheila, do you have any questions for Stephen as we wrap up?
I think we're pretty much out of time, Stephen. I've been sitting here with my ears glued to you, and I would love to have you come back again. Thank you. It's been awesome. And I really, really do appreciate your work. Thank you so much. And Sharon Ann, brilliant research as always. Thank you. And yes, how awesome and exciting.
Yes, very exciting. Okay then. Well, I'll see you in a couple of months' time then, Stephen. I'll be in contact.
No worries. Look forward to it, Sharon. Thanks again, guys. It was enjoyable. Good work.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you, Sharon Ann, Oddities E-Club magazine editor, and our wonderful guest, and Stephen Strong, and we'll look forward to having Stephen back again. Awesome. As I said, Sharon Ann, thank you, Bobby. Thank you, everyone. And that's us for tonight. Any last words, Sharon, before we go?
No, my brain's actually on fire, so I've just got to leave and go and write a few things down. So I shall talk to you soon. I'll probably in the next couple of days.
All right, awesome. Good night, everybody. This is Sheila
Bye, Bobby.
signing out.
Bye,
Bye,
Stephen.
Bobby.